The woman trapped upside down in the crushed black SUV grabbed Ethan Rowe's wrist with blood-slick fingers and whispered, "It wasn't an accident." He almost let go. Because even through the shattered glass, the rain, and the flashing red lights bleeding over the highway, he knew that face. Nora? Her eyes rolled toward him. 7 years vanished in one violent second. 7 years of flyers. 7 years of empty bedsheets. 7 years of telling himself she was dead because the alternative was worse. And his missing wife looked back at him from the wreckage. If stories like this hit somewhere deep inside you, subscribe, like this video, and stay with me until the end. Because this one doesn't just break your heart. It asks what you would do if the person you mourned came back with a truth too cruel to forgive. The storm had turned the interstate into black glass. A medical transport van had jackknifed across 2 lanes. A pickup had gone under it. The SUV Nora was trapped inside had slammed the guardrails so hard the steel folded like paper. Ethan wasn't supposed to be there. He'd finished a late tow call and was heading home to the same small house he'd lived in since the night she disappeared. Same porch light, same chipped coffee mug on the sink, same ache. Now he was on his knees in broken glass, tearing at a bent door while sirens screamed closer. "Nora, stay with me. Look at me." She stared through him for one terrible second, like she didn't know if he was real. Then she said, barely moving her lips, "They told me you stopped looking." Something cold slid into Ethan's stomach. "Who told you that?" Her fingers tightened weakly around his sleeve. "Don't let them take me back." Then her head fell sideways. By the time the paramedics pulled her out, Ethan was shouting at people he didn't know. He shoved an EMT who tried to move him away. He kept saying the same thing like a man praying in reverse. "That's my wife! That's my wife! That's my wife!" Most of them looked at him with the careful pity reserved for the unstable. Until an older state trooper turned, recognized the name on Ethan's license, and went pale. Nora Rowe had been a missing persons case for 7 years. At Mercy General, they made Ethan sit under fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects. His jeans were soaked through. His knuckles were split open. On the TV in the corner, the local news was already replaying aerial footage of the crash. 1 dead driver, 2 critical patients, 1 unidentified female survivor. Unidentified. Ethan stood so fast his chair scraped the tile. "She has a name." A nurse stepped into his path. "Sir, we need to verify." "My wife disappeared 7 years ago." His voice cracked on the last word. "I know her face. I know the scar on her chin. I know the mole on her shoulder. I know the sound she makes when she lies and when she laughs and when she—" He stopped because his throat closed. The nurse softened, but only a little. "We still need to verify." An hour later, a detective walked in with a folder and eyes Ethan recognized immediately. Lena Ortiz. 7 years ago, she'd been the only person who didn't treat Nora's case like a voluntary walkout. The only one who kept calling after everyone else moved on. Now she closed the door behind her and said, "We ran her prints." Ethan didn't breathe. Lena set the folder down slowly. "It's Nora." The room went silent in a way that felt physical. Ethan sat down because his legs no longer worked. "Where was she?" he asked. Lena looked at the glass wall, at the blur of nurses passing outside. "That's the problem. Her prints came back tied to a sealed identity. The transport logs call her Anna Vale. No criminal record, no family, no prior addresses, but the biometrics match Nora Rowe." Ethan lifted his head. "Vale?" Lena's jaw tightened. "As in Victor Vale."
Nora's father. The man who shook Ethan's hand at the wedding like he was touching something dirty. The man who told Nora she was ruining her life marrying a mechanic. The man who funded hospitals, sat on charity boards, and smiled for magazines under headlines with words like visionary and savior. The man who, 7 years ago, told Ethan with disturbingly dry eyes, "If my daughter wanted to be found, she would be." Ethan felt heat crawl up his spine. Why was she in a medical transport van? He asked. Before Lena could answer, the monitor over his shoulder suddenly spiked. Not his. Nora's. He was moving before anyone could stop him. She was in ICU, bruised and pale, a line stitched above her eyebrow, her hair chopped unevenly at her shoulders as if someone else had been deciding how much of her was allowed to exist. He stopped in the doorway. 7 years. He had dreamed of this moment so many times it had become poison. In some dreams, she ran to him. In others, she looked ashamed. In the worst ones, she asked why he was still waiting. But the real Nora looked afraid. Not of the machines, of the room. Her eyes found his and filled instantly. Ethan? He crossed the distance in 3 steps and took her hand so carefully it hurt. It's me. She started crying with no sound at all. He had imagined himself saying 1,000 things if she ever came back. Where were you? Why didn't you call? Did you leave me? Did you love me?
Did you survive? Instead, he said the only true thing. I never stopped. Her face folded. They lied, she whispered. They kept saying you signed papers. They said you moved. They said you told them not to say my name anymore. His anger came so fast it steadied him. Who? She closed her eyes. Her lips trembled. My father. The room turned cold. Ethan leaned closer. Nora, tell me what happened. But when she opened her mouth, the door clicked. A doctor entered. Behind him, a man in a charcoal coat stood with 2 attorneys and a look of offended control. Victor Vale. He saw Ethan holding Nora's hand and didn't miss a step. There's been a misunderstanding, he said calmly. Nora recoiled so hard the heart monitor shrieked. No! Her voice ripped out of her. Don't let him near me! The doctor looked startled. Victor didn't. That was the worst part. He just sighed, like she was a difficult child. Nora, you're confused. Ethan stood between them. Get out. Victor's gaze moved over him with old contempt, sharpened by inconvenience. This woman has suffered from severe delusional episodes for years. My attorneys have the medical documentation. Lena appeared in the doorway behind them. Funny, because I have fingerprint confirmation that identifies her as Nora Rowe, missing since 2019. For the first time, Victor's face shifted. Only slightly. Only enough. And Ethan knew. He knew in the marrow of his bones that this man had rehearsed every moment except this one. Nora was shaking. He locked me away. Victor's voice hardened. She disappeared because she was unstable. I spent years protecting what dignity she had left. Protecting? Ethan barked out a laugh with no humor in it. She was in a transport van under a fake name. Victor ignored him. Nora, sweetheart, you had episodes. You hurt yourself. You begged me not to let him see you like that.
Nora made a sound Ethan had never heard before. Not fear. Rage forced through years of sedation. "You told me my baby died." Everything stopped. Ethan turned so slowly it felt like his body had become someone else's. "What?" Nora looked at him, and now there was horror in her tears for a completely different reason. "I was pregnant," she whispered. "When I disappeared, I was pregnant." The floor seemed to tilt. Ethan took a step back as if he'd been struck. "You... what?" "I found out 2 days before." She was crying harder now, words breaking apart. "I wanted to tell you after dinner. I had the test in my bag. I was driving to meet you when my father called. He said Mom had collapsed at the clinic. When I got there..." Her breathing hitched. "He knew."
He had read my message draft. He said I was throwing my life away, that I would chain another child to poverty, that you would ruin me. I told him to go to hell. Victor snapped, "That is enough." Nora flinched but kept talking, almost like she had to outrun him. "They injected me. I woke up in a room with bars on the windows. He said if I signed annulment papers, he'd let me leave. I refused. Months later, I had the baby. A girl." Her voice cracked completely. "He told me she was stillborn." Ethan couldn't feel his hands. A girl. A daughter who should have been 6. A child he never knew existed. He turned to Victor with murder in his eyes. Victor lifted his chin. "You have no proof of any of this." Nora laughed through tears, and it was the most broken sound in the world. "Then why did you keep me alive?" Victor said nothing. Lena stepped forward. "That's what I'd like to know too." But Nora answered for him. "Because he needed me declared insane, not dead." She swallowed hard. "Dead people get investigated. Sick daughters can be hidden." Victor finally lost his mask. "You were dangerous." "To who?" His silence was the answer. Hours later, after Victor was forced out and uniformed officers were posted outside Nora's room, Ethan sat beside her while dawn bled gray through the blinds. Neither of them had slept. He kept looking at her and then away because every bruise felt personal. Because grief was one thing. Grief was clean compared to this. Finally, he asked, "What was her name?" Nora's eyes filled again. "I called her Grace in my head. I never got to hold her long enough to say it out loud." Ethan bent over, elbows on knees, face in his hands. There are cries that come from sadness, and there are the ones ripped out by lost time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red and furious. "She's alive." Nora froze. "I don't know how I know it," he said. "But men like him don't bury leverage. They raise it." A flicker crossed Nora's face. Fear, hope, both dangerous. Then the TV in her room changed. A morning segment came on covering the Vail Foundation's annual Children's Gala. Victor appeared on screen outside a white stone mansion, smiling for cameras. And beside him stood a little girl in a navy dress, maybe 6 years old, holding his hand. "Victor's granddaughter, Ava Vail," the anchor said brightly. "The private philanthropist rarely appears in public, but made an exception this year." Nora sat upright so violently her IV tugged. "No!" Ethan turned to the screen. The child had Nora's eyes. He didn't see it at first because shock has its own cruelty. But then the girl tilted her head the exact way Nora did when listening carefully. Same slight inward turn of the left foot. Same tiny notch in the right eyebrow. Nora started shaking all over. That's her. The words barely came out. That's my daughter. Ethan stared at the screen as Victor smiled like a grandfather built in a lab for public trust. Ava Vale. Not Grace. Not Roe. Victor had taken their child and taught the world to clap for it. The next 48 hours became a war. Victor went on television first. He called it a tragic family situation. He said his daughter had resurfaced after years of psychiatric instability and was now under appropriate care. He never said Ethan's name. He didn't have to. The internet did the rest. Old photos resurfaced. Ethan outside bars in his 20s. Ethan after a DUI arrest that had happened before he met Nora and before he got sober and stayed sober for 8 years. Comment sections turned vicious. Maybe she ran for a reason. Maybe the husband was abusive. Maybe the father rescued her. By noon, reporters were outside Ethan's house. By evening, someone spray-painted "Gold Digger" on his garage. Nora saw it all from the hospital and nearly asked Ethan to stop. Not because she doubted him, because she knew what Victor's money did to truth. Then Lena came back with something better than hope. A nurse from Haven Ridge Behavioral Center had vanished the same night as the crash. Her name was Mara Bell. She'd worked the long-term restricted floor for 4 years. 2 days before disappearing, she had emailed herself copies of sealed patient logs. The logs listed Anna Vale. Sedatives administered daily. Restraint incidents. 1 unauthorized postpartum event. A child transferred to private guardianship under special family order. Ethan stared at the printed pages until the letters blurred. Grace had existed on paper. Victor had just hidden her under another name. But paper wasn't enough. Victor's legal team tore into it within hours, calling it forged, stolen, inadmissible. And then they did something worse. They filed for emergency protective custody of Ava, citing threats from unstable biological claimants. In one motion, Victor turned parents into strangers. That night, Nora asked Ethan to wheel her to the hospital chapel. It was empty except for the smell of wax and old wood. She sat there in a blanket with bruises on her arms and said, "Maybe he wins." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Don't." "I'm serious." Her voice was thin with exhaustion. "What if she's happy? What if I rip her out of a life she knows, and all I do is hand her 2 broken people and a war?" He knelt in front of her. "You are not the wound in her life," he said. "He is." Nora shook her head. "You didn't hear me when I had her." He went still. She stared past him, seeing somewhere else entirely. "There was this yellow light over the bed. I remember because it made everything look dirty. I kept asking for you. I knew you weren't there, but I kept asking anyway. And when she came out..." Nora pressed a fist to her mouth. "She cried once. Just once. I counted her fingers before he took her. I counted because I thought if I memorized something, no one could erase her." Ethan broke then, completely. He rested his forehead against her knees and cried the way men cry when no pride is left to protect. Nora put trembling fingers in his hair. 7 years had been stolen from both of them. Not just love, parenthood, first steps, fevers in the night, birthday candles, the right to be ordinary. The next morning, Lena drove them past a private academy in the richest part of town.
They stayed 2 blocks away. At 2:57, the front doors opened. Children spilled out in uniforms and laughter. And there she was, Ava. Backpack too big for her shoulders, hair tied crooked like she'd done it herself. She was chewing the sleeve of her sweater while digging through her bag for something, frowning in concentration. Exactly like Nora when she couldn't find her keys. Nora made a sound that didn't belong to language. Ethan grabbed her hand so hard his knuckles whitened. A nanny came down the steps. Ava looked up, brightened, then hesitated when Victor's car pulled around instead. The little girl's smile faded. Tiny. Almost invisible. But Ethan saw it. Nora saw it too. And something changed. This wasn't a princess stolen into luxury. This was a child being managed. Victor leaned out, and even from a distance, Ethan could see the command in the man's posture. Ava climbed in quickly, eyes down. "Did you see that?" Nora whispered. "She's afraid of disappointing him." They followed the car to the Vale estate and watched the gates close. That should have been the end of the day, but when they got back to the hospital, a woman was waiting in the room. Ethan's mother. Ruth Rowe looked older than she had a week ago. Smaller, too. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Nora stiffened instantly. Ruth couldn't meet Ethan's eyes. "I need to tell you something before someone else does." The room went silent. 7 years ago, Ruth had worked part-time cleaning at the Vale estate after Ethan lost steady work during the plant shutdown. One night, 3 months after Nora vanished, Victor called her in privately.
He showed her a newborn girl sleeping in a bassinet. He said the child belonged to Nora. Ethan went completely motionless. Ruth started crying. "He told me if I said one word, he'd send you to prison." "For what?" Ethan asked flatly. Ruth looked destroyed. "He had proof you tampered with insurance forms at the garage." Ethan laughed once, bitter and stunned. "I signed the wrong date on one claim." "He said fraud is fraud when you have the right prosecutor. He said you'd lose everything. He said the baby was safe and Nora was gone, and if I loved my son, I would let the dead stay dead." Nora stood so fast her chair toppled. "You knew?" she said, voice shaking with fury. "You saw my baby and said nothing?" Ruth folded in on herself. "I thought I was saving him." "No," Ethan said. "It was quiet. Too quiet. You were saving yourself from fear." Ruth reached for him. He stepped back. "There are betrayals done out of malice, and there are the ones done out of weakness. Sometimes the second kind cuts deeper." By the time Victor's gala arrived, the city had divided itself into camps. The sainted father, the unstable daughter, the husband chasing money. The truth had become entertainment, which was exactly why Ethan decided to break Victor in public. Lena had secured one more thing: a DNA sample from Ava's discarded juice box collected legally from a school bin, enough for a preliminary familial match. 99.9%. Their daughter. Still, Victor's lawyers insisted it proved nothing without court authentication. So Ethan and Nora did something courts take too long to stop. They showed up. The gala glittered with chandeliers and polite donors in black tie, all of them drinking beneath banners that read, "Healing Futures." Cameras flashed. A string quartet played. Victor stood at the front with Ava beside him in a silver dress.
one hand resting on her shoulder like ownership disguised as affection. Then Nora walked in. The room inhaled. Conversations snapped in half. Phones lifted instantly. Victor's expression broke for the first time in public. "Nora," he said into the microphone, smiling too late. "You shouldn't be here." She kept walking. Ethan stayed one step behind her. Every eye in the room followed the bruises not quite hidden by makeup, the stiffness in her gait, the terror she forced herself to wear like armor. Victor tried again, lower now. "Don't do this." Nora took the microphone from his hand. For 1 second, her fingers trembled. Then she saw Ava looking at her with quiet, confused curiosity, and her voice steadied. "My name is Nora Rowe," she said. "7 years ago, I disappeared."
I did not run away. I was drugged, imprisoned, and stripped of my name by my father, Victor Vale. The room erupted instantly, but she kept going. He told me my daughter died at birth. She did not. He renamed her Ava and raised her as his own blood while calling me insane. Victor lunged for the mic. Ethan blocked him. Security moved in. So did Lena. Badge up, voice sharp. "Nobody touch her." Victor's composure shattered. "This is extortion. She is sick." Nora turned toward him fully then, and what happened next was worse for him than screaming. She pitied him. "You needed everyone to think you were a savior," she said. "But you were never saving children. You were collecting them, controlling them, owning them." Gasps rippled through the room as Lena signaled 2 officers forward with the sealed patient logs. A screen behind the stage, still linked to the gala projector, flickered. Someone in the booth, bless whoever they were, cut from the charity slideshow to scanned documents. Medication charts, false identity records, the postpartum entry, a guardianship transfer, and then the DNA report. Victor spun toward the screen in horror. The crowd that had spent years clapping for him took a collective step back. That was the moment Ava started crying. Not loudly, just a small, frightened sound. "Nana?" she whispered to Victor, using whatever name she'd been taught. He reached for her. Nora flinched, and Ava saw it. Children notice fear faster than adults notice facts. She looked from Victor to Nora, to Ethan, to the giant screen above them, and the world she knew began to crack. Victor grabbed Ava's wrist. "We're leaving." Ethan moved. "So she can disappear again?" Victor swung at him. Not hard, not well. Like a man who had spent his whole life using signatures instead of fists. Ethan caught the blow, shoved him back, and Victor stumbled into a table full of champagne flutes. Glass exploded across the marble floor. Cameras flashed like lightning. Somewhere, donors screamed. Public humiliation is ugly, but sometimes ugly is the only language monsters understand. Victor hit the ground, and Ava ran. Not to him, to the far side of the stage where she crouched behind a curtain, sobbing. Nora didn't chase her. She lowered herself slowly to eye level several feet away and said the hardest sentence of her life. "You don't have to come to me. I just need you to know I never gave you away." Ava looked up. Tears streaked her face. "Who are you?" she whispered. Nora's mouth trembled. "I'm the woman who counted your fingers." The little girl frowned through confusion. Nora held out her own shaking hand. "You have a tiny crescent scar on your left heel. The nurse said it happened because you kicked so hard right after you were born." Her voice broke. And when you were 1 minute old, you stopped crying when I hummed." Ava stared. Ethan watched the moment happen in silence. No music, no miracle. Just a child feeling something older than memory. "Can you?" Ava swallowed. "Can you hum it?" Nora did. Softly. The same melody she had built out of fear and love under a yellow light 7 years ago. Ava's face changed. Not recognition exactly, but rest. Like some locked part of her had heard that sound before the world taught it to be afraid. She crossed the distance in 3 tiny, trembling steps, then threw herself into Nora's arms. Nora made a sound that tore through everyone in the room. Even Ethan had to turn away for a second because the sight was too holy and too cruel at once. 7 years late, still real. Victor was arrested before the cameras stopped rolling. Charges came fast after that. Unlawful imprisonment, fraud, medical abuse, falsifying records, obstruction. More names surfaced. More sealed doors opened. Other families began asking questions they had been told not to ask. The empire cracked. Not all at once, but enough. Ava didn't become Grace overnight. She didn't call Ethan Dad the first week or the second. She had nightmares. She hated closed doors. She hoarded crackers in her pillowcase. She asked whether being good made adults keep you longer. Those questions broke Ethan more than the years ever had. So he answered every one, patiently, honestly. "No, sweetheart. Goodness isn't rent. You never have to earn staying." Some evenings, she let Nora brush her hair. Some evenings, she wouldn't be touched at all. Healing came jagged, slow, human. One night, 3 months later, Ethan was fixing the porch light when Ava opened the front door and said, very casually, "Mom says dinner's getting cold." He turned too quickly and banged his head on the ladder. Ava laughed. Real laughter. The kind that doesn't ask permission. Ethan held the ladder with one hand and his aching head with the other and started laughing too. Because after everything, joy came back in ridiculous little pieces. Inside, Nora looked up from the stove. For a second, they just stared at each other across the kitchen. Not because the pain was gone, but because it wasn't stronger than what had survived it. There are crimes that steal bodies, and there are crimes that steal time. Time is worse, because you can't return it in court, can't stitch it back in a hospital, can't apologize 7 birthdays into existence. But that night, with rain tapping softly against the windows and their daughter setting forks crooked on the table, Ethan understood something the years had tried to beat out of him. Love does not always save you in time. Sometimes it saves you after. And sometimes after is enough to build a life the truth can no longer bury. If someone you loved came back after the world stole 7 years from both of you, would you forgive the time or spend the rest of your life making sure it was never stolen again?